All right, guys. Hey,
We're back.
welcome back to the Right Brain Podcast. We're just super jolly out here, just gonna talk about depression, but not in like a
In a positive thing.
in a good way.
In a positive way.
It's got to be talked about.
It's got to be talked about because when you talk about the most classic left brain deficit, prevalent emotional thing, it's got to be depression. And
Yeah.
it's something that is so widespread and really pretty misunderstood to a certain extent because it's like ADHD. It's one of those things that everybody gets diagnosed with depression, and everybody at one point was put on antidepressants. I mean, it's like our generation, almost every mother we knew was on some sort of like Prozac or, it was just,
Yeah.
they would just give it out like candy, you know what I mean? And it was just everybody who had any bad feelings or whatever was immediately put on antidepressants like it was going to be, a magic cure.
Right.
But there's also been a lot of really good science on depression and what it looks like in the brain and what's going on and what areas of the brain are somewhat involved.
Yeah, I mean, I know, well, obviously we know Dr. Rob is a pretty balanced brain. So I think because I have asked you, well, I guess I only asked you like today if it's something you ever struggled with. I guess you don't really like wonder it about your parents, but you said that you've never really dealt with it.
No, I have. I think everybody does. With all of these things, everybody feels these emotions.
Yeah.
Everybody feels deep sadness at some point, or sense of loss, or, guilt or shame. And it really is the matter of degree. When, like your mom actually said, which was a good point, if you have things that are bad that happen in your life, if you're not feeling sad, there's something wrong with you,
Yeah.
right? And so, feeling bad about things that, went bad in your life or a bad time, that's normal. But if it takes you away from where you can't function, like you can't get out of bed, you can't do anything, you can't work. And I never got to that point, meaning at times in my life when, of course, I was very, very sad or felt very, embarrassed or whatever, or felt a deep sense of loss. And there were times when I would feel really, really bad. And I think the other thing that naturally happens is you start, those thoughts that immediately come, I think, from a right brain dominant person can get pretty dark. Like, whether you feel like you shouldn't be here or
Yeah.
self-harm,
Yeah.
that type of thing, and I think that's part of the risk. And I've experienced those thoughts for sure at times. But again, I think that we all do. It's just the extremity basis, meaning how severe is it? Like,
Yeah.
if somebody in your family dies, some people, you're going to be sad. You lose
Right.
a parent, you lose a child. I mean, you're going to be incredibly sad. But with the same loss, somebody may be completely dysfunctional, where they can't get out of bed, they can't do anything, they can't move, they can't eat. And that's the difference, I think.
Yeah.
When somebody's really, they're not going to be able to get themselves out of it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what's your experience with it? I mean, as a very right brain dominant person, because that's really the risk. I mean, we know that, going back to a guy named Richard Davidson, really, who wrote a book called Brain Asymmetry with another researcher named Kenneth Hugdahl in the 90s. That was like a book that changed my life. That textbook was incredible. It was a compilation of all of the brain asymmetry research that had been going on for, a long time with some of the biggest names. And he had shown, using EEG, that there was what was called an alpha asymmetry, where there was not usually supposed to be alpha waves in the left frontal lobe. They were usually more in the right, and that if you saw more alpha in the left side of the brain than the right side of the brain and in the frontal lobe particular, that was associated with depression. So there was a decreased activity in the left frontal lobe and increase relatively of the right. So that is something that's been out there since really the early 90s as a model of what depression looks like in the brain.
Interesting. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think we've made it obvious now, but yeah, depression is obviously people who are right brain people, like the people that we're kind of have started this podcast for. Yeah, they're a lot more susceptible to that, right? To depression. Or, well, because it's your right brain. Yeah.
Exactly.
Well, yeah, I'm just reestablishing.
Right.
But yeah, my experience, I think I've struggled with depression for a really long time. I think in college, I was very depressed for a while, and that was really hard to manage. And I like had horrible coping skills. And then I actually, after I graduated acting school, I was super depressed for a long time. I think because like they kind of just make you like completely dive into like all of your trauma and all these things that you've like found ways to sort of suppress for your whole life and like work through. And then like the whole point of acting school is to completely like break you down and make you experience the deepest of every emotion and like learn how you can get there. And then they call it zipping back up after, where it's like very hard for people like after they just like completely let all of those things like be constantly like at your fingertips. Like it's so hard to zip all that back up. So I think after acting school for a while, I was pretty depressed. And then again, I guess it's happened like, I wonder if it's a pattern, but yeah, during the pandemic, right before I moved to Nashville, I was probably the most depressed I'd ever been. And then year and a half ago, going through the breakup I went through was like maybe at the same level of depression as that was. And that's something I feel like I've only recently been able to like start to feel happy again.
So is it mostly in you? It sounds like it's mostly been triggered by loss of a relationship more than anything else.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah.
Or, well, I don't know about college. I think that was like loss of structure and comfort and like taking on all of these different things that I don't think I was very good at balancing.
When in college, like when you first started college, or?
Yeah, when I first started college. I think probably because I wasn't playing soccer all the time and like I didn't have that outlet. And then I was like trying to like, I was obviously always like super obsessive about like my weight and about like, and obviously organizational skills aren't my thing and all this stuff. So then I was like balancing all this stuff that I guess I kind of had in a certain structure all through high school. Like then I was just like left to figure it out all on my own, and I handled it so poorly.
Yeah. And that's a couple of things there. One is that even though we all, and especially your mom, was always somebody who really encouraged you to do things on your own, right? Meaning that we tried to raise you guys to be independent individuals. That's one of the things I think that can be great when you go to college is you really finally have to do things on your own. But for somebody who's left brain deficit and right brain dominant, that has a lot of task avoidance, especially for those mundane type of organizational, or may struggle with some of the executive functions that go along with organizing and prioritizing and not procrastinating, then it can just lead to overwhelm. When you first go to college, you're not sleeping because you're partying all night.
Yeah.
And you may be doing, drinking a lot or, smoking pot or whatever. And all of those things, I think, can get to a student. And then also there's all this new work that you have to do as well. And you don't have anybody helping you with your homework. You have to do it all on your own. And I think with you, especially, you were in a classical music program. So now, you have to read music and do all these left brain music type of things that, isn't really your forte. That's not your type of music. And I think that was all challenging and intimidating for you.
Yeah.
So, there's reasons for it, but that's, how you cope with it. And So were there points where you felt like, I mean, there was ever a point where you couldn't get out of bed or you didn't go to class or?
Um, I mean, I think in college, like I figured that all out because I was just trying to like get by. But I think like at the other times that I've gone through like deep depressions, I've definitely not been able to get out of bed and like just will completely not answer any of my friends for like a week. And I feel like they've kind of gotten used to that, which I'm grateful for my friends being understanding of me. But yeah, they always say that like I'll just I don't know, especially when I was going through that time this past whatever, like I would just kind of disappear for a while. And yeah, I wouldn't be able to like talk to anyone. And I'm sure that had I maybe gotten outside and like whatever, I would feel better, but I just like couldn't bring myself to that point.
Well, that's the thing. So let's talk about some of the real effective treatments for depression, right? Again, neurologically, it's this imbalance between different networks. Said this many, many times, but and of course, it really is the way it works. Although no one usually puts it in this kind of simple context, but the left brain, especially the prefrontal cortex and the frontal lobe on the left side of the brain, tends to generate more what we call approach behavior. So, get up and go, motivation, go out, goal directed behavior, going out into the world and seeking a goal. And the left brain is driven by joy and happiness. Also anger, which is an emotion that actually is a good emotion. It can be a good emotion because it keeps you persistent even in the face of adversity. So you don't give up. So you stay motivated. And instead of quitting, you get pissed off and kind of push through. And then pride. So feeling good about yourself, feeling, pride. And, these are things that curiosity, the left brain is driven by, again, looking for a goal, seeking behavior, searching for something. And, all of that is when we're really positive and motivated, the left brain is really key to that. The right brain is there to kind of still be cautious during that. So the left brain doesn't really have a lot of fear. It goes out and it may be a little bit reckless. And the right brain is kind of searching for any danger at the same time and is more, as we said, driven by emotions that are considered negative, things like sadness, fear, shame, embarrassment, guilt, rejection, sensitivity, disgust. And so when you look at that, the right frontal lobe generates sadness, shame, guilt. The left brain generates pride and happiness. So you just look at the balance of those two things. And if you have too little joy and happiness and, very low pride, you have sadness that's extreme. And then you have embarrassment and shame. And that right there is actually the definition of major depressive disorder. If you look it up, it's basically, extreme sadness, lack of joy, and, combined with guilt. And that's that. And then obviously that goes along with low self-esteem and, that fear of rejection is really high. So that's what depression is. And a lot of people get, they just put depression and anxiety in the same thing, and they may be linked together, and that may be what bipolar kind of is. And we talked about how anxiety can be generated by the right brain. But again, sometimes it's just really that sadness or shame, those two things together without fear, without, that anxiety or social anxiety. Is just a sense of loss and,
Yeah.
And that sense of sadness. And what you just said before was when you were playing soccer and you were an athlete and you were out running, that seems to have some sort of protective benefit. And in fact, there's been a lot of research, really good research, showing that one of the best things to help with depression is running and exercise. And there was even the cover, I think, of Discover Magazine or Scientific American a few years ago. It was actually even said the depression cure, and it showed somebody on a treadmill running. However, because people are very depressed and they lack motivation, so an area of your brain called the anterior cingulate, and especially the mid-anterior cingulate, And the left brain generates dopamine, and dopamine is kind of like your happy chemical, right? That makes you really more active and persistent. And so if you lack that motivation, to get yourself to go run is going to be almost impossible, even though it may help you. But that's where you get people, like I work with people that are at that level where they're so depressed or they're so severe where they know exactly what they need to do. I mean, I was working with one young man that we know who was an athlete. He was always in good shape. He's a very nice guy, funny guy, very successful, very intelligent. And he, for 2 years, was going through psychotherapy and getting medication, and it wasn't helping him at all. And he was actually just in his apartment, couldn't get a job, couldn't do anything, and just started to feel suicidal because that's what naturally is going to happen. I mean, that's the danger of that left brain deficit, right brain, is that those thoughts of suicide come up and become real. And, you know, very rarely does somebody with right brain deficit actually commit suicide. It's almost always the other way around. And the problem was, if you asked him, you know, what should you do? He would say things like, yeah, I should work out. I should go to the gym. I should run. I should go outside in the sun. That probably would make me feel better. But I can't do that. Mm-hmm. So now what do you do? And, you know, you try to give someone a pill. It may help. It may not. Or it may help just a little bit because it really doesn't address the core problem. So that's where we have to have the person get in to us, where we can start to work with them and start to do exercises at a very low level, but really just try to stimulate their brain and balance it out, you know, like using things that are going to stimulate that left brain, like, you know, using different color lights or different frequencies of sound or direct stimulation with that, like direct current. But we need to couple that with bottom up, with physical activity. And ultimately, you know, if we can get that person to start building, it's about changing the brain first. So we have to do things not relying on the person because they're not going to be able to be motivated enough to get themselves to do it. They're not. And so you can give them things, you can give them homework, you know, they may take a pill and it may take a little bit of the edge off, but it's not going to get them to get over it. And you have to change the brain. And there are many different ways to do that. But physical activity and physical exercise has to be foundational. So we would get people and we just get them on the ground just doing some basic core exercises just to start feeling like they're doing something and just to get them moving their body and just to start getting them to build some core strength and some, you know, build a foundation, something like that. So, you know, that's what we need to do moving forward with this.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. And that's what when you're talking about how, you know, running or something or going out in the sun would help.
Okay, sorry. I'm just feeling a little like weird about this episode. I don't know.
Why?
Because I feel like it's not like talking about like what I feel like it's just like not being sensitive towards how it makes people feel.
So let's turn it there then if you feel that.
No, I don't know. I'm getting sad.
Well, because we're talking about depression. What do you think, honey?
I think you're hitting on the surface, and I think if you're really going to talk about it, you got to go a lot deeper, and I don't think that Ellie's ready to do that, so maybe it's better that...
Either that or maybe we do that, like show your emotion, actually show what you're feeling for people and talk about what you're feeling and why you're feeling that.
Why are you saying I'm not ready to do that? Am I not coming off that way?
But why don't we just use that? Why don't we go with that?
Oh,
we never have to show the show, but why don't we go
I know,
with
but I also, like, because I was talking about how it felt in college, and then you were like, well, that's because you didn't, like, I just feel like you just kind of brushed over that, and you were like, well, you're not organized, so that's...
No, that's not what I said, but you can say that to me on camera if you want.
No.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's say that.
No, now I'm being a baby.
No, honey, be real. Show reality. Show what you're feeling. Don't hide this part. This is what this is all about. Okay, let's just go from here. We can always cut out and edit, right? All right, so let's just talk about what you're feeling right now, because obviously you're feeling emotional about right now, and I know this is bringing up stuff, and maybe you feel like I'm not I'm not being sensitive to that. So tell me what you're feeling.
I'm just like feeling like, I don't know. I just feel like a lot of people struggle so bad with depression, and that it's really hard to feel understood by it. And I guess I was just getting a little upset because I feel like obviously your role is to explain it scientifically because you're a scientist, but it just didn't. I just want to make sure that it's also relatable to our listeners, that like I understand how they feel on the emotional side. Because I guess like when you're like going through something like depression so heavily, and then someone's like trying to tell you how to get out of it, it's like, well, yeah, obviously that's how you get out of it, but like you feel like you're drowning.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I understand. But you're exactly right, and you're kind of highlighting, like, I'm trying to be like the voice of reason and say, and I even said that, that's why people need help.
Yeah.
You can't leave people on their own. You can't just give them a pill, or you can't just say, psychotherapy can help. But, from my standpoint, we need to actually start doing something with people because they are really lost. And
Yeah.
I understand that. Maybe you felt like I wasn't being sensitive to what you were talking about, what you went through in college.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I get it. I get it. And I really do. And I think that people will appreciate the fact that you're getting emotional and that you're feeling, because they understand that you're feeling this personally.
Yeah.
So what would you like to say to people like that feel like, what do you feel like they would want to hear that would
I'd like to say sorry that my face is puffy now that I've started crying. And no, I guess I'm just getting emotional because that's why I started this podcast, because I felt so depressed that I couldn't even get joy from music and performing anymore, because I was like, I just felt like, I feel like when you get so depressed, you just feel like completely numb, and there's just like no feelings at all. Like you just don't feel joy, you don't feel anything. And really the only thing that like kind of brought me out of it was like the hope that I could do this podcast, because like then maybe other people wouldn't have to feel this way all the time too. And yeah, so I just feel like, I mean, obviously, um, I hope that like other people will be open to talking about their experiences, but I think I've just seen it with like a bunch of my songwriter friends, like people that I think are the most talented people, but they just feel things so deeply, and you can tell from their songwriting, like the fact that they're even able to write something like that, what they must go through when they're alone. And that's what leads people to kill themselves a lot of times, and especially in this creative world. So I just think like it's important on this show for us to like always have the balance of wanting to know how to help everyone and get out of it, but also understanding like really what it feels like and how hard it is to go through those things. But yeah.
And it's again, I knew that some of the motivation of what you wanted to do this show, but I didn't know it was because you were in such a depression. And I guess that's the other thing, is that you, like most people, I think you're pretty good at covering it up to a certain extent. You know what I mean? And that's hard. So you also want people to feel like they can be heard, in that.
Yeah, definitely.
And that you understand and sympathize and empathize with them.
Yeah, because you don't think like, I think when you're going through that, like, I mean, that's why, people have suicidal thoughts, because they're just like, who's going to care, or like they just feel so alone and so weird and like dark in their thoughts that like they can't even think about the other people in their life because they're so sad, and like they feel like other people would like probably don't feel that way. And I think it's like, yeah, just like the details of all of it, I don't think are spoken about. It's just like, yeah, I had a negative thought. I mean, it happens all the time, like with my friends and stuff, where it's like, oh, okay, I'm just gonna go kill myself, or like make like jokes like that and whatever. But like then a lot of times people's jokes like that are coming from like a real spot, especially all my artist friends, because I've seen them in like deep depressions. And the funniest people and the people that are able to, you know, bounce things off their back and like make everyone laugh are the ones that are in the most pain behind the scenes. So that's always like something that I want to make people aware of too, you know. But anyway, sorry I cried.
No, I think it's good. I think it's, again, I think what we have to be here is real. We have to be authentic. And I think
Yeah.
that's the point, is that people are going to relate to this, and they're going to relate to you, because whatever you were feeling at that moment, you know, feeling criticized, feeling, you know, even though it wasn't my intention, whatever you were feeling, other people out there might have been feeling the same thing. And you became that voice for them. You became that, you felt that, right?
Yeah.
You felt that. It's like you felt anybody out there struggling with depression, you channeled that. And you were like, wait, you know what I mean? You can't just dismiss this, or, you know, talk about it in superficial terms. This is a real thing. This is real pain.
Yeah.
And it is pain. It's the worst kind of pain, because emotional pain is the worst pain, because it doesn't have a focal point. That's why I think people turn to cutting sometimes, because
Yeah.
it takes that deep pain that's inside that you can't find, you can't point to, and it tries to put it to a point. At
Yeah.
least that's what I think. I don't know. What is your thoughts on that?
Yes, that's true. Yeah. I did struggle with that in college. So
Yeah.
I think that was like my way of handling that. And also because it like kind of like felt like a punishment if I felt like I was like being a disappointment or something, you know, like just to myself or just in general. Because I just wasn't handling college like that well. So then I was like mad at myself or something. But yeah. But anyway, I don't know.
Well, again, I think it's real important that I want to tell people that that's why I think they need help. And I think most people need help, you know, beyond just a pill. They need someone to literally lead them by the hand and do things for them. Like when we do it, like I said, we get people, you know, they'll just kind of sit in a chair, and we may, you know, strap things on them and, you know, do things and stimulate their body and do things in a way, because they don't have the ability to do it on their own. They just can't, you know. And I told you about, you know, people talking about just, you know, positive things, positive thinking, you know, Tony Robbins, who I think is great, but people just can't. It's not like you can just change that state. You can't just get out of that. And even though you know that you should, and you know the things that you could do to maybe help yourself, you can't get yourself to do it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's like quicksand.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. There was one thing that I was just about to say, but now I can't remember. You just said something that reminded me. Sorry, I have to think. What did you just say?
That sometimes you get in a deep, dark place, or we strap things on you. And
I was gonna say, I think the thing that's complicated with depression too is that like, it's people that like, especially when you're a right brain person, like you're so self-aware. It's not like you're like, why am I like this? It's like you've probably analyzed every single little bit of everything of why you're like it, and probably think every day like, oh, if I just did this, then things might start to get better, or if I just did this, whatever, and like I'm this, and maybe to like you've said, right brain people like judge themselves too heavily, and they're like too aware of what's going on and what people think of them. But then yeah, it's like on top of that, it's like, I don't know, because when I went through my breakup last year, I was in therapy for it, and then I like couldn't keep even showing up to the therapy because I didn't, for some reason I was like felt judged by my therapist, which is my own thing. I was like, I feel like you're mad at me. She was like, that's incredibly inappropriate. I'm your therapist. We're not friends. I was like, oh. But yeah, it's just like talking about it over again, when you've kind of already like analyzed all the things, you're just kind of looking for like how you would change it, even though you kind of already know how you should change it, but you won't change it. It's like it's just super complicated.
It is. And it's even, you know, it comes down to things like, like lately I've been listening to some different tapes on, different aspects of manifestation, and where it's like, you have to, your inner self-talk, your inner conversation is so important. And on one hand, it's like, well, you can't try to monitor your self-talk. You don't want to talk negative. If you talk negative to yourself, that's going to bring it on.
Yeah.
But yet you don't want to constantly monitor your thoughts and say, well, don't think that, and forcibly think positive things. It's very, very hard to do. It's almost impossible when you're not feeling it, when you're not in that state.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, my work, because I understand that it's been about, okay, how do you change the brain in somebody that can't do anything for themselves at this point? And not being judgmental about that. That's literally a state. And we may have a little child who literally can't control their body or their movements, or doesn't even feel anything. We can't expect them to do stuff. We can't send them home with exercises. They're babies or they're children. Yeah. And then an adult who is, in such a state where they can't really get themselves to do anything. How do you change that when that person isn't capable of doing anything?
Yeah, well, I will say, like, I think, because I was saying right before I moved to Nashville, that was like one of the most depressing times ever. And I think also just because, like, during the pandemic, I think a lot of people went through depression, but I just felt like, oh, I've been trying so hard for so long at this career, and now all my shows are canceled, and also I like haven't really done anything I'm proud of up until now, like, or like that at least that was close to what I dreamt of for myself. And that was like the worst moment ever and the darkest time ever. And I remember I like gained weight during that time, and I was just like always like having I was honestly having a lot of suicidal thoughts. But I think that I do feel like very grateful for you, because I feel like you are someone that always like taught me, like, even when you're in your darkest spots, like, you don't need to know how you're going to get to where you want to get to, but just like have fun with it and daydream on where you wish you were, and like that you're actually in that place. And so that's when, like, every day I just started going on like these manifestation walks, and I would listen to these tapes by this guy, Aaron Doughty. And I would just like for 2 hours, like just visualize like everything that I wanted. And it was, and like when I say that I was at the lowest of the possible low, like I was like, oh, I want to do this. I want to have an album, but blah, blah, like all this stuff. And I didn't even have like one thing that was leading to that. And then that's when I decided, I was like, well, if I stay in New York, like I'm like, this is it. So I have to make a change. And that's when I moved to Nashville, not knowing anybody and not having any direction yet. I mean, it was still the pandemic, so I didn't know anything. I'd never been here, but I think like just making that leap, even though I was like in the most depressed time I ever could, and I didn't know how I'd figure it out. I think like there is something to that with like God and the universe, like looking out for you and being like, okay, well, at least I see you're trying, and I don't know, that you'll figure it out somehow. And that, I don't know, that helped me. So
yeah, it's interesting, because if you remember, Isaac said the same thing, that the thing that helped him, I had said to him, was that you don't have to know how,
Yeah.
And I think most people don't realize that, meaning when you're talking about change or manifestation or whatever, if you do know what you want, like you have an idea of what you want, even though that
it
may
just like
seem,
hurts to think about sometimes.
Yeah, even though it may seem almost far off and almost impossible, but if you know it, I think what happens is a lot of people, they don't see how it could work. I don't see this. I don't have any producers. I don't have any money. I can't buy a plane ticket. Whatever it is, you're thinking of all these different action steps and all these things that don't seem, but and all that is okay and good to have. It's good to have a plan, but the way it works is that you don't always have to. You don't have to know how it's going to work. You just need to know what you want. Mm-hmm. And try to move towards that. Just try in some way. And it may be just start listening to some positive tape. I mean, that's, if I'm ever in a bad state, that's what I usually do. There's certain basic things I've done in my life that when I was in different points where I didn't know what to do, I would, just start listening to some positive stuff and then try to start exercising in some way. I knew that if
Yeah.
I could just get my body to feel better. And then the other thing is also I would throw myself into my work, and really try to go into answering questions that I had that I never saw anybody really answer. And so, throwing that into which all of that would make me feel better. It would take my mind off of the negative ruminations that I was having about all the negative stuff. Because the only way to stop those negative ruminating thoughts is to replace them on the left side with something positive, with some goal. That's the only way to really stop that off. And so you can't have a positive and negative thoughts existing at the same time. And when the negative thoughts just take over so much, where it's just you can't stop thinking about it at night when you go to sleep, it's even worse.
Yeah, I wake up at like 3 a.m. all the time. And that actually, I said this to my Uber driver the other day because he was like joking with me about something. I think about like that he likes to wear women's deodorant, but that's another story. But he was like saying something about like how his girlfriend wakes him up while he's snoring, and then once he's up at like 3 a.m., then he can't go to sleep. And I was like, yeah, when I wake up at 3 a.m., I have these crazy thoughts where like everything that I didn't get done hits me, and I just sit there wide awake and whatever. And he was just silent, and then he was like, that happens to you too? And I was like, yeah, dude. He's like, I've never heard anyone say that before. And I was like, yeah. He's like, that happens to me every night. I can't stop thinking about all these things that I didn't do and like who I'm disappointing and all this stuff. And I was like, he's like, I can't believe somebody else deals with that. And I was like, I think a lot of people deal with that.
A lot of people.
But I don't think, yeah, I don't. That's why I just think like with depression, a lot of people think that no one else is feeling the things that they're feeling, or they're just like, what is this? I don't know.
Well, that's a big thing with depression and with a lot of mental health issues is that people feel like they're alone. They feel like they're the only one going through it. They feel like they're weak, or that they should be able to just get out of it, or they feel like they're broken, and it becomes over exaggerated in your brain. And another emotion that we don't talk about a lot, but a lot of people with right brain dominant that I've worked with have talked about hopelessness, like the feeling of it's hopeless.
Yeah.
I remember, one of our people in our family at one point was going through a pretty heavy period of depression, and I remember, he said to me that he would see like a homeless person on the street, and he would immediately think of all of the homeless people in the world. And he felt so much pain for them and felt so sad for them, but also felt like it was a hopeless problem, and that would throw him into, really feeling depressed because it was like there's no hope. And so hope, I think, is also, part of a left brain goal type of thing. And hopelessness is really kind of connected with sadness and loss and just, and I think that's how a lot of people feel. They feel like hopeless, like I don't see any way out of this. And that's when people turn to suicide, I think.
Yeah, I've felt that way a bunch of times. But I also just wonder about like, because I don't know what manic depressive means, but I would assume that maybe it's like hand in hand with bipolar. But I mean, I know women are more complicated anyway with like their hormones and how they're just like, I don't know how we think throughout the month and stuff, because I can get crazy. But I think like
you can say that I can't.
well, I'm saying it. I could be a little crazy. But I do think like that, I mean, even me talking about this, I'm kind of seeing that there's like always like a pattern. Like I do fall into like pretty deep depressions for like months at a time, and then I'll come out of them, but then I always go back in, and I know that life is like cyclical, and we're always like getting to the top, and then sometimes you'd get knocked back down and all the way back up. And I think I've learned to manage it a little bit better, at least than when I was a little younger. But I don't know if that's like has to do with like something that's related to bipolar or what, but I do know that a lot of the people that I know that struggle with depression, it's like a pretty cyclical thing.
Well, that's the thing. That's what we're trying to do is say, how do we change that? How do we shorten those cycles or change the cycles or even eliminate them in some way? And I believe that there are ways of doing that because it's really all being generated by your brain, and it's also being generated by your talent, because the more you tap into that talent, the more you tap into that right brain. And when you talk about manic phases, a lot of people, if they go through these creative bursts, like where they're just, writing all the time, maybe not sleeping, and maybe it feels positive because you're doing this, or maybe it's out of an emotional state, or maybe it's like some of our guests have talked about when they're going through a breakup and, and they just start writing songs about it, or some people feel like, okay, I just got to go out and run and work out and exercise, or just constantly write down goals in my journal. That's kind of the manic phase of it. Mm-hmm. But that's more, again, that creative right brain type of search. And maybe, but that will also start to shut down the left brain, and that may end up leading to a depressive state. And that's the cyclic type of thing that you're talking about. And it's about kind of trying to find a balance. And I believe it's really finding that balance between the left brain and the right brain. And
well, I have seen you do that for a lot of people. Like, I know patients that have come in that have dealt with depression, and they've done it.
Have you felt like, when we treated you, or I treated you, or I gave you things to do when you were in those states, that it was helpful for you?
Oh yeah, for sure. Absolutely.
Right. And I think that's a large part of what you wanted to let people know about this, right?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. I wanted to take a little detour in our podcast because I just wanted to say, like, hey, here to represent the inside thoughts, and then here are the outside things that can help you. But no, that is all to say. I mean, you just happen to be blessed with a very complicated daughter, but I know that I've watched you help.
I am blessed.
So many people with all of these things that I talk about and deal with, and he has helped me so much with a lot of them. But then, when I think about them and I want to talk about them because I've experienced them, I want everyone to know that they're not alone with how they feel. But that's all to say, this podcast, like I said, we're talking about depression in a good way. There are a lot of really wonderful things that you can do to help yourself.
Right. But I think this was important, that it was just you being able to really relate to people and speak, recognize what people out there feel when they're in this state, and they understand that you feel that.
Yeah.
And that's great. I think this was really good for that.
Okay, cool. Thanks for letting me cry.
Well, yes, it's my pleasure.
Okay, if you guys have any questions, send them in, and I'm sure we'll do another episode on this. Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Love you.
Great. Love you too, honey.